Hi guys, it's Meredith Peterson, Executive Director with the Down Syndrome Association of Pittsburgh, and tonight's speaker series is all about reducing stress through the holidays and beyond. So we have Shelley Johnson joining us tonight as our speaker. She is a life coach, speaker, and mom of two boys. One happens to have Down syndrome. So she is another parent, just like a lot of us. She founded the Intentional Transformation to support parents of developmentally disabled children to reduce stress, avoid burnout, and create the lives they most want. So she has had the pleasure of coaching and speaking to parents all over the world about reducing stress, self-care, time management, goal achievement. So she is a woman after my own heart. So I'm excited to hear from her tonight. And so with that, Shelley, I will go ahead and pass it over to you.
Great. Well, thank you for having me. I'm super excited to be here. It's always fun to get to talk to other parents of kids who have Down syndrome. It's just, we all share a connection there. And so I just wanted to start with how about if everybody just takes a couple of deep breaths so we can just kind of arrive in this space. And I know some of you are doing other things simultaneously, and that's totally fine. But just arriving as much as you can in this space and giving yourself the gift of this time, whether you're watching it live or watching the recording. Yeah, and like Meredith said, so the title of this webinar is Reducing Stress Through the Holidays. However, everything that I talk about is going to be applicable to all the other stressful situations in your life, right? Like think IEP meetings, challenging behaviors, medical diagnoses, relationship things, right? Whatever you've got going on, like these three steps, able to apply it to all that stuff. So, yeah, and I am super happy to have this be very interactive. I'm going to ask you some questions. And I would love to read your responses. So yeah, feel free to type into the chat. Or if you have questions, feel free to type in the chat. If you want to respond to my questions, type into the chat, because that will kind of help me tailor what I'm talking about a little bit more to you. And so if there's anything that you need to do to take care of yourself, like getting something to drink or finding a more comfy place to sit, or I was on a webinar recently where they said, if you need to go get a more comfortable pair of pants, go do that and come back. So yes, and have a paper and pencil handy, because what I walk you through, you're going to be able to use in the future, and the answers that you come up with as we're going through this webinar are going to give you some insights to things that you can do to handle your holidays a little bit differently this year. So it'll be valuable information for you going forward. So I am just going to share my webinar or my presentation now. Screen, so then I have to get everything on the right screen. All right, so hopefully now you can see my presentation, yes?
Yes. Yep, we're good.
All right. Right. So just a little bit about me. So I'm in Seattle. It's not quite dark yet. It's sunset, and actually it looks like a beautiful sunset. I have a little peekaboo view of downtown Seattle, and I can see the sun reflecting off the buildings downtown, and it looks gorgeous. And we've had lots and lots of rain for the last like 3 or 4 days, like flooding and blah. And so it's nice. Today was a dry. So yeah, so like Meredith said, I'm a life coach. I'm actually a life and mindfulness coach. I've been a life coach for 5 years now. I used to coach internally for Adidas. Family and I lived in Germany for a while, and I worked for Adidas, and I was a coach, like executive leadership coach for them for a while. And now I just have my own private practice and do some schools and things. But I'm also a mom, 2 boys, and there's pictures of my 2 boys. Christian is my oldest, he's 10, and Sebastian is my younger one, and he's the one that has the extra chromosome, and he is 7, almost 8, he'll be 8 next month. And he is in 2nd grade. So we've got all that going on. And then there's a picture of our family that's actually a few years old because, and we didn't do any photography. Like, we need to update our family pictures. So my whole goal as a coach and, in these presentations and all the things that I do is to help parents, specifically parents of disabled kids, learn how to manage stress a little bit better, because I know that when we are less stressed, we are better versions of ourselves, right? We're better parents, we're better partners, better employees, better advocates, and we can show up and for ourselves and for the people we love. So if you'd like, I would love to see in the chat if you want to post about like who your kid is, their age, something like that. I'd love to get to know you a little better. Yeah, and then finally, so a little bit about my hobbies is my husband and I met sailing. We live, Seattle, lots of big sailing community here. So that's how we met. And I also just love to travel. I've been a big traveler, traveled a lot in my business and my previous business as an IT consultant. Travel a little bit now as a coach. I've gotten to go to India and Kenya and Uganda and Ireland and kind of various places in Europe to coach people. And that's been a lot of fun. And now with Zoom, I coach everybody all around the world on any given day. It's a lot of fun. So we've got some younger kiddos and some older kiddos. Nice. All right. So what I'm going to teach today is a simple process, right? And I say simple, not necessarily easy, right? So it's just 3 steps, but these steps take some practice to learn how to do them well. And so don't be frustrated with yourself if, immediately upon leaving this PowerPoint presentation, you try to do these 3 things and you don't quite get it right? Like you will get it right. Everybody is capable of getting it right, but it does take some practice. And these steps that I'm teaching are exactly what I do myself when I'm stressed or feeling any kind of emotion that seems unhelpful. And it's also what I work with my clients on. So the steps are feel your now. And then we're going to talk about finding the sentence and then deliberately. And these 3 steps, even actually just doing step 1 on its own will give you relief from uncomfortable emotions or stress. So step one. So step one is just identify what you're feeling, right? And feeling means one word, right? Not a whole bunch of words, not what's going on outside yourself or what you're thinking, right? Like, he should stop doing that is not a feeling, right? That's a thought. He should stop doing that is a thought. The feeling might be frustration, annoyance, anger, something like that. I'm feeling like I just can't get everything done. Also, not a feeling. It's a thought, it's a sentence in your brain. The feeling that goes along with that might be overwhelm or anxiety or something of that nature, right? And we often, as humans, like we're fairly complex creatures, so we often feel more than one feeling at a time, right? Like there might be anger and sadness. There might be overwhelm and unworthiness. There might be joy and sadness, right? Like that bittersweet feeling. And so the way to handle if there's more than one feeling is just to choose one at a time, right? We don't want to complicate it with more than one feeling at a time. So we just do one at a time. I usually say pick the one that feels the strongest, the most prominent, whatever. And then you can always go through these steps again for the next feeling. Tons and tons and tons of feelings. So you have lots of opportunity to do this. So let's actually right now think about the upcoming holiday season, right? The most wonderful time of the year, right? And think about what are your true feelings when you think about the upcoming holidays. You know, write that down for yourself. You can put it in the chat if you'd like. Yeah, overwhelmed, frustrated. Yeah, for me, it's overwhelm a lot, stress, maybe sometimes some for me, some kind of confused about do I really want to do that event or not? You know, do I really want to go to all these various family events or those extra events or the school events or the whatever? Yeah. Yeah. Sad, Erin says. Yeah. Right. And that's the sentence. So Erin, your comment, right? Sad. And the sentence that's causing the stress the sadness is it's unenjoyable and it should be enjoyable. And that's what's creating your sadness. So once you've identified a feeling, the next thing to do is to just drop into your body. So take that one feeling that you noted down and drop into your body and notice what the sensation is that goes along with that feeling. So in my body, overwhelm, that's the feeling that I tend to experience frequently, feels like a lot of movement kind of in my chest, kind of butterflies in my stomach, a little bit like restlessness a lot in my fingers, kind of this. So drop into your body for that emotion. See if you And so this step of, and go ahead and write down those sensations if you'd like, or just take note of them for yourself in your head, or you can put them in the chat if you'd like. And this act of starting to notice our feelings and notice the sensation that goes with them, even just that part of it, often will give you some relief from the feeling. And that's because the act of noticing the feeling and naming it moves you into the watcher position, so that you're now watching your emotion in your body, watching your emotion happening. And that takes some of the power out of the emotion and allows you to create a little bit more space for it. So when we have particularly an uncomfortable emotion, if you think about all those sensations, right? The butterflies in my stomach, the restlessness in my fingers and legs, the kind of lots of energy in my chest, my shoulders get tight, right? If we think about taking all those sensations and like bottling them up, right? Like in a glass jar where they can't move around, right? That sensation gets stronger when we want to think about bottling it up. And this process of observing them and noticing how they feel allows us to create a bigger container and a softer container for them, right? So it becomes like a fabric bag or something that they're just in, right? They have much more space to move around. And so they feel less intense. As for us, is it also helps us as we get better and better at doing this, it helps us start to notice that the feelings perhaps aren't as bad as our brain likes to think they are, right? Like when I'm feeling very overwhelmed, right? Like there was a lot of this during COVID when we were homeschooling and doing all that stuff, right? When I'm feeling overwhelmed, when I can step back and say, oh, overwhelm feels like this in my body, and I can just notice the sensations, I'm like, okay, this isn't like comfortable. It's not like my ideal feeling that I'd like to feel all the time, but it's manageable, it's bearable. It's not it's not going to kill me, right? In fact, bottling it up and trying to ignore it or avoid it or distract from it or whatever, right, will be much more detrimental to my health than opening up to it and expanding to it and noticing it and watching it. Right, and this takes some practice, and especially for really intense emotions. So my suggestion for really intense emotions is to give yourself short times, right? So that you say like, oh, I'm going to check in and see how my body is feeling, see what emotion I'm experiencing for 30 seconds, 15 seconds, 1 minute, right? So that you aren't, if you're not practiced with feeling really uncomfortable emotions, you aren't like pushing yourself too far, right? That you're just giving yourself some practice. And the more you practice with it, the easier it gets to feel those emotions and to allow them and to give them space. And what our brain likes to do, our brain is constantly in this space of particularly our primitive brain, kind of at our brainstem, kind of the less evolved part of our brain, wants to constantly be avoiding pain and seeking pleasure, right? And uncomfortable emotions, it sees as pain, right? It's like overwhelm, that's painful. Sadness, that's painful. Anger, that's painful, right? And so it's wanting to avoid those emotions as much as possible, which is why it's kind of like, let's just like shove this around down. Let's push this in a drawer in the closet and close the door and close the drawer and not look at it, right? Because it's like, that's pain. Okay? But we can teach our brains. Luckily, we also have a prefrontal cortex, right? And so we can actually teach our brain that, wait a minute, actually feeling overwhelmed, feeling sadness, feeling anger isn't so bad, right? It's uncomfortable, not going to deny that, right? But it's the process of feeling it has more upside than downside. So if you wanted to skip this whole exercise of noticing your emotion and feeling it in your body, right? That's something good to notice, right? If your brain was like, nope, I don't want to go there. I don't want to notice the feeling. This is going to be uncomfortable, right? Notice that. Wanting to avoid that. What's going on there? And if part of it is that you don't know how you're feeling, that you're like, I don't know, like it just feels terrible. That's okay too, right? You can be like, you can just go to the basic, like it feels good or it feels bad, right? Or if you want to go to like to the next step is kind of those basic, right? Mad, sad, glad, afraid, right? Just categorize it into one of those four things. And the more that you get in touch with your emotions, the more that you'll be able to discern and come up with variations and flavors. And there's also all kinds of, you can go on the website, on the internet and look up like a wheel of emotions, and you'll find there's these lists of emotions, and there's all kinds of diagrams and things of emotions. So if you're wanting to get more like pointing emotions, there's all kinds of resources out there for that. Right? And if you're in the space where you're like, I don't know how I'm feeling, sometimes a question that can help you is just, what's my best guess? Right? Sometimes we get hung up on, oh, I need to identify the exact right emotion that I'm feeling, right? And that's that desire to have the right emotion kind of keeps us from discovering any emotion, right? And so if you notice your brain being like, I don't know, just seems, I don't know, right? Then what's my best guess? And that's also a good time to just go back to, does it feel good or bad? Up or down? That's my son's. How are you today? Right? So the way to practice this, right? Of course, in the moment when you're feeling the emotion is a great time to do it. This time of year in particular, as there's, additional kind of stress for many people, it's a great idea just to check in with yourself throughout the day, right? Set a little alarm on your phone or at work or whatever works for you, and check in a couple times a day, 3 times a day, 4 times a day, whatever seems workable for you. And literally have it be just like a 1-minute thing, just like ask yourself there's 2 questions we've talked about so far. I'm going to give you a third in a second. Ask yourself, how am I feeling? What are the sensations in my body? And then the third question is this productive or unproductive? And so you can just ask yourself about a minute. And if you want to, you can have it take longer, right? You can set your timer and do a 2-minute, like move into your body, close your eyes, notice the sensations, take some breaths, and that will give you a significant break from the stress, from the overwhelm, from the sadness, the anxiety, or whatever. Okay, so the third question of this step one is it productive or unproductive? And there's two different kinds of stress. So stress is really just negative emotions, right? Uncomfortable emotion. I don't even really like to use the word negative, right? But uncomfortable emotions, that is stress, right? And it's usually some combination of overwhelm, sadness, anxiety, anger, frustration, right? It's some of those kinds of emotions. And the way to know the difference, to know if it's unproductive or productive, is that unproductive stress increases over time. Right? It doesn't decrease in severity. And unproductive stress tends to create either inaction, either we're kind of frozen, stuck, not taking action, or kind of frantic action, kind of disjointed all over the place and doing this and that and that and that. And productive stress and tends to have us create focused action, right? So all stress is not bad stress. And there's actually some fascinating research that's been done on stress and how actually it's our thinking about stress that makes stress harmful or not harmful to our health. But that's a separate, it was really fascinating when I read about that. But this understanding, like, is it productive or unproductive, is really useful to know so that you can just figure out, like, is this an emotion I want to do something about, that I want to change in some way, or relieve, or watch more closely? And productive stress is emotions that you don't necessarily want to change because it's useful to you, right? Like anger is actually useful to some extent to take action at change, at advocating for changes in my kids' school district, right? If I wasn't angry about it, if I just moved instead to kind of a, oh, it's okay, they don't have to do inclusion, they can just, right? Then I'm not taking action. I wouldn't take action from that place. But when I have some anger, right? And I'd like to temper how much anger I have, because when I get too much anger, then it also turns into unproductive action, right? When I have some anger and some like, wait a minute, this isn't how I want them to do it. They can do something different, right? I'd like them to take on more inclusion. I'd like them to learn this about behavior. I'd like them to whatever, right? Then I have a whole different driving emotion behind my actions. Okay. All right. So let's look at the next step of our 3-step process. So the second step is finding the sentence. And Erin kind of already did this, right? She's like, I feel sad because it's unenjoyable and it should be enjoyable. So the step 2 is finding the sentence, the thought in your head that's causing the emotion, right? And we usually think it's what's going on around us that's causing our emotion, but it's not, right? It's our thought. And we know that because otherwise we would all feel the same way about the same circumstance, right? Like we would all, so the example I often use is a dog, right? You're walking down the street and you see, you know, on the next block, you see somebody walking their dog, right? And if you're the person that has the thought, oh, I really like dogs, I'm curious about that dog, I'd like to pet it, right? If you have the thought, I like dogs, you're going to have the feeling of care or curiosity or something like that. And you're going to go ahead and walk over to the person with the dog and talk to them and ask to pet their dog and whatever, right? But if you're somebody that sees that same dog, same circumstance, same outside situation, and your thought is, oh, dogs are unpredictable, I don't know what that dog might do, right? You're going to feel fear and cross the street or turn around or somehow avoid the dog, right? So same situation, same circumstance, but different thoughts create a different emotion in us. And so that's good news, right? It's good news because that means that we actually, if we can learn to manage our mind, manage those sentences in our brain, then we can start to have a bit more control over our emotional life, right? We can have a bit more influence over what we're thinking, how we're feeling. Which is great because we don't have control over what other people do or say. We don't have control over politics and world, the weather, the economy, whatever, right? Our spouses, our kids. I mean, God knows we don't have control over our kids, right? Like they are their own people that do their own thing. Right. And so since we can't control all of those circumstances outside of us, it's really useful to know that we can control our thoughts and our emotions, our responses to those circumstances. Right. So I'd invite you to think about that feeling that you wrote down, your feeling about the holidays, and see if you can identify what the thought is, what the sentence is that's causing that feeling. Wrote, I'm anxious to fit everything in, right? So her feeling is anxiety, and her sentence might be, I can't fit everything in, or I need to fit everything in, or there's too much to do, right? Something like that. And feel free to put it in the chat if you'd like. My overwhelm is often caused by the thought, I don't want to miss out. It's kind of that FOMO, like I want to do it all. I want to go to the zoo lights, and I want to go see the Christmas ships, and I want to go to the Nutcracker, and I want to spend time with my family, and I want to see the friends, and I want to do the whatever school events and the things and the that and the that and have presents and have this and that, right? Like I don't want to miss out. And that feels right. That creates this overwhelm for me. Right. So Amanda feels frustrated because she is having the thought, I struggle to communicate effectively, or I don't communicate effectively, or it's hard to communicate, or something like that. Right. So what's interesting to know about our thoughts, so just some kind of facts about our thoughts. We have about 70,000 thoughts a day. Now we have no hope of learning to be aware of all of them, right? That would like we wouldn't then not be able to do anything else with ourselves, right? So the idea is not to become aware of all of our thoughts, but to become aware of kind of some of the key thoughts that cause the most unhelpful emotions, and as you do this more and more, you'll start to notice kind of themes in your thoughts. You'll be like, oh, yeah, I often have. For me, it's often overwhelm, and it's often coming from, I want to do it all, right? And it's often coming from, right, this desire, this I don't want to miss out kind of thought, right? And so that's useful for me to know, because I can watch for it in all different kinds of parts of my life. And then another thing about our brain is that we kind of have this, our brain is kind of seems to be wired to kind of have a negative thought bias, to kind of look at and notice the things that have gone wrong in the world, right? Either for ourselves personally or in the larger world, or things that how we're doing it wrong, or how we're missing out, or whatever. And it evolved that way to help us survive, right? Like if you think back, like it was really helpful for us as we were evolving to notice the things that were wrong, right? Like the bush that had the berries that made us feel sick, right? It was useful for us to have that negative bias and for our brain to be focused on the bad things in our environment, because that allowed us to survive. That allowed us to remember, like, oh, don't eat the berries off that bush. Don't go down that path because that's where the, tigers live. Don't go, whatever, right? But nowadays, we don't live in a world where we are often, being chased by tigers, most of us, or in actual danger for most of us, right? And so that negative thought bias doesn't serve us so well. Like my brain pointing out all the events, the holiday events that I'm missing out on, isn't actually helping me survive. It's actually causing me overwhelm and stress. So one thing to think about your brain is that our brains, because of this kind of negative thought bias, and because our thoughts create so many of our emotions, that our brain is kind of like a toddler that needs supervision, right? And the great thing is that we have this prefrontal cortex that is great at supervising, that's great at, we have the ability to think about our thoughts, like that meta view of our thoughts. And so this process that I'm teaching you is that process of noticing your thoughts and noticing what they're creating for you, and starting to direct that toddler brain, starting to give the toddler a little bit of supervision. Wait a minute, don't go over there. Wait a minute. We don't have to think that. We could think this other thing. Oh, notice when you do that thought, it's creating overwhelm. Notice when you're doing that thought, it's creating fear, whatever. Right, so even these first two steps, even just doing these, brings so much awareness for you and lets you really start to understand what's going on in your brain. So the part about managing the toddler brain, right, is this think deliberately. So once we've identified the emotion that we're feeling, the sentence that's creating that emotion, we can then start to ask ourselves, okay, how else could I think about this? Right? If thinking, I don't want to miss out on all the things, is creating overwhelm for me, right? And leading to me like not really enjoying any of the things because I'm in overwhelm about all of them, right? What might be more useful for me to think? And so in this step, we want to find for ourselves a new and believable thought, right? And the believable part is kind of important because if we just slap a new thought on top of the old thought that's creating the overwhelm, and we don't really believe it, it won't really solve the overwhelm for us. We'll probably just create some other negative emotion for ourselves. And that's why often like mantras and, like positive thinking doesn't really work because affirmations doesn't really work if we don't believe them, if they're not actually changing the emotion, right? So when we come up with a new and believable thought, the idea is not even that we necessarily have to get rid of the old thought, because the old thought might be very practiced, right? Like my brain has, I don't know, probably I'm 49 years old. So it probably has like 45 years of thinking, I don't want to miss out on anything, right? It's all important and I want to do it all. I don't know how long I've been thinking that, but for probably a very long time, at least my whole adult life, right? And so that old thinking is really practiced. Our brains like to do things that they're used to doing, right? And so that thought might not ever go away for me, but because I'm aware of it, I can notice when it's happening and I can remind myself of the new thought that I want to think, which is, I don't have to do everything. I can choose just the most important or the most interesting or the most fun things to do. Right? It depends on the situation, which of those adjectives I use, right? But I don't have to do everything. I can constrain, and it actually ends up being a much better experience for me and my family, right? When I'm not putting myself on the I have to do everything path. Right? So that's it. So that's just to say that we don't have to go to like a perfect opposite thought, right? Like if I'm thinking, I don't want to miss out on anything, I want to do it all, right? Me thinking like either going to like a sunny thought of like, oh, I can just do it all and it'll, right? Isn't going to work for me. That's just going to lead me to more overwhelm. And if I try that thought on in my head, and then drop into my body and notice what emotion that creates. Like I'll notice like, oh my God, that creates a lot more emotion, a lot more anxiety if I think, okay. Right? And on the other extreme, I also don't have to go to, well, if I can't do it all, then I'm just not going to do anything. Like, I'll just screw it. We'll just skip the holidays this year, right? That also isn't a thought that has me feeling empowered or positive or good, right? That's just me kind of checking out and being angry and, right, kind of stuck, right? But me moving into, oh, I don't have to do it all. I could be thoughtful. I could be intentional. I could be deliberate and choose just the things that actually are the most important or the most fun or the most meaningful. Right? So try for yourself to think of what thoughts you could shift to. It'll just be a little bit of a shift, right? Like, example was her thing was that I'm anxious because she's having the sentence, I can't fit everything in, right? That thought to, oh, but I can fit some things in, or I can fit the most meaningful things in, or I can fit these 3 things in, or these 5 things in, right? She's not jumping to like, I can fit everything in. It's going to be great. It's going to be the most wonderful Christmas of all, right? She doesn't have to shift to that. Just a little bit of a shift to, oh, I can fit some things in. Gives that relief, gives a new feeling. Erin's thought of like, it's unenjoyable and it should be enjoyable, right? Like, it sounds like a nice thought. It should be enjoyable. But that's actually, anytime we have the word should in a sentence, a really good sign that it's actually not a useful thought, because should just creates like this, it should be a certain way and it's not, right? We end up kind of fighting against the reality, right? Had some kind of a thought like, oh, it could be more enjoyable, or I can figure out the things that make it enjoyable, or some things will be enjoyable and some things won't be. Oh, this is going to be enjoyable and that's going to be enjoyable, and this thing will be harder, right, or unenjoyable. But starting to find that middle ground, that kind of space in extremes, is usually where the sweet spot is, and where we then get to take back our power. Right. So some other examples I think are, I can get it all done, right? So, or I can't get it all done, right? So for having the thought, I can't get it all done, shifting to a thought like, oh, but I can get these 3 things done, or I can get some of it done, or I can get the most important things done, right? Or thought like, oh, it's going to be terrible. It's going to be so that dinner is going to be so frustrating and right, terrible. And she's trying to shift that to everything will be wonderful doesn't really work. That your brain won't believe that. That your brain might believe, well, parts of it will be nice. Parts of it will be very uncomfortable, and parts of it will be lovely, right? I'll enjoy chatting with that family member and that family member, and there's going to be another family member that I don't enjoy chatting with. Another really useful one for parents is like, I'm an awful mom. I'm doing it all wrong. There's something wrong with me. Oh, look, so-and-so does it better, right? So that thought, not useful, right? But likewise, shifting ourselves to the thought, I'm the world's greatest mom, probably not possible if your brain really thinks you're an awful mom, right? But the thought in the middle of those two is, I'm the world's okayest mom. A coach friend of mine actually has that on a t-shirt. The world's okayest mom. I do it great sometimes. Sometimes I get it wrong. So, and then once you've identified what new thought, what you'd like to think deliberately, right? The old thought is still going to be there, probably popping up. And when you notice that old thought popping up, or you notice the stress in your body, and you do the work and identify, okay, what thought is creating that stress today? right? You can then just remind yourself, oh, right, and I also have this other thought. And the idea is to kind of give them equal airtime, right? Like we don't always have to be on the radio, the negative thinking radio station. Switch over to the positive thought, the useful thought radio station once in a while, right? And if we strive for, equal airtime, or even just increasing the amount of time we spend thinking the new thought a little bit, you'll have a big change. So some other questions to kind of ask yourself, particularly related to the holidays, that can help you come up with deliberate thoughts are, how do I want to feel during the holidays? Right? And you can do that in general over the big long holidays, or you can do it for specific events or specific activities, right? Like, how do I want to feel at Thanksgiving dinner if your family celebrates that? Or, right, whatever, family meals. How do I want to feel as I'm shopping for gifts? How do I want to feel as I'm giving gifts, as we're opening gifts, right? You can do it for the general holiday season or for very specific events and activities. What am I currently thinking that doesn't have me feel that way? What's my current thinking about that event or about the holidays that's not creating that feeling, that's instead creating anxiety or overwhelm? And then ask yourself, what could I think to create that feeling? What thoughts might help me create that feeling? And then how can I practice that thought or those thoughts? And great ways to practice thoughts are write them down on a sticky note and put them somewhere, right? Like you used to do with your affirmations and mantras. Your affirmations and mantras are not going to be so perfect. They're going to be more in the middle space, more in that gray space. Right? Like some things will be okay. Some things will be enjoyable. And then another question or group of questions is, what will be hard about the holidays or hard about this specific event? And what could I do or think to make things easier for myself? Right? And sometimes that's showing up a different way at the event or not showing up at the event, or, right? Like there's also a lot of people pleasing that happens around the holidays, of doing or the in-laws expected, or even kind of the phantom people pleasing, like that's just how we've always done it. And so we're doing it that way, right? And we can actually take the opportunity to kind of notice that people pleasing and the phantom people pleasing and rethink, like, what do I want to do? And do I like my reasons for doing it or not doing it? So when you land on a new thought that you want to start practicing, the way to know if it's a good thought, right? The way to know if you believe it is to think it and notice what emotion it's creating for you. So if you think that thought and it makes you feel worse, more anxious, angry, sad, whatever, right? It's not a thought that you believe, right? And so try to dial it back even a little bit more and make it a little bit more in the gray space. So did anybody come up with any deliberate thoughts that you think might be useful, that you want to share? All right, that's fine. I gave you some examples, so So just to recap, right? So we have the 3 steps. First, feel how you're feeling. Second, find the sentence that's creating that feeling. And then third, see if you can find a different sentence, a different thought that's more deliberate, that would have you feel how you'd like to feel, would get you out of that stress. Right? And like I said, you can do these same 3 steps about any emotion, right? About any stressful circumstance, no matter if it's a short-term stress or longer-term stress. So these are good to keep handy, you know, for the next conversation you need to have with your IEP team. I've got mine next week. I'll be doing this. Right? So I'm totally happy to help you if you're trying to do this and you have questions, or if you're trying to land on a more useful thought, right? On the deliberate thinking. I think that step is especially takes some practice and takes some kind of nuance to figure out, okay, what then? And so feel free to reach out to me on email. I put my email there, shelley@intentional-transformation.com. You can also go to my website if you want. There's a contact me form there. There's also, I have a webinar specific to IEP stress and handling stress in the IEP process. And that's, there's a free webinar there. So you can go get that if you'd like. It's a little bit more detailed than this process, but same kind of idea. Or you can connect with me on Facebook. It's just Intentional Transformation. And I do have a Facebook group that's specifically for moms of kids with developmental disabilities. And it's a pretty small group. There's only, I think, 60 people or 70 people in there now. And it's a private group, so you might not be able to find it, but you can, if you go to my Facebook page, I think you can find it. If you can't, just DM me or email me, and I'm happy to add you to the group. And in that group, we just talk about all this kind of stuff and other things, time management and all kinds of things.
Shelley, is the title Moms Taking Charge of Our Mental Wellness? Is that the group?
It. Yes.
Okay. So yeah, it is on your page.
Okay.
It's under the more tab groups. So just if anyone wants to find it, I just found it. So there it is. Thank you.
Great. Okay. Any questions? Comments?
I mean, Shelley, if I can jump in, just personally as a people pleaser, you know, sometimes it's hard for me to, you know, really think through what it is that I really think versus what I think other people should think I should think, if that makes sense. So any words of wisdom for that, just as we're, you know, trying to go through this process?
Yeah, so it's the same kind of thing, right? It's noticing that thought. And often for people pleasers, the thought is something like, I don't want to disappoint so-and-so, right? Or so-and-so wants me to do this, or so-and-so is going to think I'm a bad mom if I do this or don't do this, right? There's so many options. And so the starting to just notice that sentence in your brain, that thought, and what feeling that's creating for you, right? Which is usually some kind of stuckness or resistance, or for me, it's often kind of a unworthiness almost that I feel when I'm thinking those thoughts, like, oh, if I do the thing that my mom wants me to do, then I can finally feel worthy, right? And so noticing like what that emotion is and what that thought is, and even just moving to, I don't have to do it, right? I may still do it, right? But doing something because I have to do it, because I think I have no choice, feels a lot different than doing that same thing because, oh, I want to do it because my mom will enjoy it if I'm there, right? Someone likened it to going to a movie, right? If you think about like your kid really wants to see, okay, so my son's super into Frozen right now, right? So he wants to watch Frozen 2, right? And we've seen it 30,000 times, right? But I would be willing to watch Frozen 2 with him because he wants to, right? But there's some things that I might not be willing to do just because he wants to, right? Like I'm not always willing to, so like with my older son, he loves to play basketball. And I'm not willing to go out and play basketball with him for like an hour and a half. But I am willing to go and play basketball with him for like, I'll play horse with him, right? For like 20 minutes. That's usually how long it takes me to lose. Right? And so getting really clear on like, oh, what am I willing to do for him? It absolutely would not be my choice to go play basketball any other time. I would never be sitting bored and think, oh, I'll just go shoot some hoops. Not in my realm, right? But really asking myself, what am I willing to do just because he wants me to? Has no other impact on me than that. So that kind of finding that gray space. And if you have kind of a relationship with a particular person, often our parents, right, or the in-laws, that is particularly you're in people pleasing a lot with them, it can take time to untangle that. And you just do it one thought, one event at a time and start to unravel, right? And paying attention to the opposite ends, right? From oftentimes people pleasers think that either I have to do everything the person wants to keep them happy, or I'm going to do nothing that they want, right? And they go to the extreme opposite end of the spectrum. Like, I'm just going to cut them out of my life and not do anything that they want. And I'm going to be, right, angry and, right? And neither of those extremes is necessarily where you have to go. You absolutely can if you want, right? But you could also find a sweet spot somewhere in the middle that's like, oh, I'm willing to do this and I'm not willing. And just take your power back.
Awesome. Thank you.
Anything else? All right. Well, it was great to meet all of you virtually. And I'm absolutely happy, to, if you want to, happy to answer any further questions you have.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Shelley. We really appreciate it. Awesome. All right, guys. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening.
Take care.
We got this, guys. We got this.
Happy holidays.
All right. Take care.
Maybe they'll be the most okayest holidays.
There you go. I like it. That can be our new motto. So perfect. Thank you so much, Shelley.
Bye.
Have a good evening, everyone. Bye.